Welcome to Fantasia, home of the melodious. My name's Azallea, and today, gonna be bringing you guys the update to my Altergeist deck. So without any further ado, let's just jump right into this. So starting off, of course, we were playing 3 copies of Altergeist Meluseek. Now, Meluseek is one of those utility cards that actually come into play a lot when we get into the trap lineup, and I'll explain why when we get there. But if she inflicts battle damage to the opponent, because she can attack directly, you can target one card your opponent controls and just send it to the graveyard, so it bypasses those pesky cards that trigger off of things like destruction, which is kind of nice. So yeah, that's 3 copies of Meluseek. Now let's move on into the next monster. We were playing 2 copies of Altergeist Silkwitous. Now we're only playing 2 copies of Silkwitous because the fact that this new card got released in Flames of Destruction. 3 copies of Altergeist Multi-Faker. This is the card that brought this deck to the forefront of the competitive scene, where it's actually seeing play, and it's competing with the top tier decks like Sky Strikers and Trickstars, which is kind of cool. Now Multi-Faker definitely sped up this deck, and it's also the reason why we cut Silkwitous from 3 to 2, because now Silkwitous is not something you want to draw into, it's something you kind of just want to tutor out from your deck if you have Multi-Faker. So if you activate a trap card, you summon Multi-Faker from your hand, and then you summon Silkwitous from your deck. And that's pretty much one of the most potent plays that this deck can make. Now next off, we're also playing 3 copies of Altergeist Marionetter, and Marionetter is one of those cards that's really powerful because on normal summon you can just set a Altergeist trap card directly from your deck to your side of the field, so things like Protocol, Manifestation, all those things are very easily accessible. And because you don't actually search with it, you just set it directly from your deck, you can bypass floodgates such as Mistake, which are actually seeing a bit of play in some people's decks. So yeah. Anyway, moving on, the last Altergeist monster we play is Altergeist Conqueri. Now, Conqueri is a card that not a lot of people play, but I really enjoy it because of the fact that you can abuse it over and over in a single turn despite only having 1 copy. You don't ever need more than 1 copy. 1 is definitely more than enough because you have things like personal spoofing and stuff that can just continuously loop it over and over. You can also use Silkwitous with this pretty well. So that's going to be it for the Altergeist monsters, and those are my ratios. So next off, we're going to go into some of the hand traps that we play. So for the hand traps, very simple lineup, and actually not too many of them. We're playing 2 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, and 2 copies of Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. Now, if you don't have Ash Blossoms, of course you can replace them with something else, like Effect Veilers. You can replace them with Droll and Lockbirds. Those are all very effective cards against the top tier meta decks right now, especially things like Sky Strikers. But Ash Blossom is very generic, and it's really good if you just hit the main combo pieces. You can stop entire turns, and Ghost Ogre, similar fashion, where if your opponent's relying on field spells and things like that, you know, True Dracos, if people are still playing those, you can hit field spells, hit the diagram, you can hit big monsters on the field, because Altergeist monsters are pretty small in terms of attack points, so if your opponent's activating a larger monster on the field, you can always hit it with the Ghost Ogre and get rid of it, and that's also kind of nice. But yeah, that's the hand traps that I play, only 2 of each, and they've been tested out pretty well because we do have a bit of draw power and a bit of rummaging through the deck, which we'll get into when we get to the spell cards. So the spell cards right here, we're playing 2 copies of Pot of Duality. This is my favorite pot in the game, actually, because Pot of Duality lets you see a bunch of cards. You could just excavate the top 3 cards of the deck and add one of them to the hand, which is kind of nice. Now, we're also playing 2 copies of Pot of Desires. I only play 2 copies. You don't really want to play more than this, because when we get into trap lineup, you'll see why. These are the only spell cards that I play. Duality helps you dig for your floodgates, and Desires helps you just draw into more cards so you can, you know, potentially set more back row. And that's pretty much it for the spell cards. So next up, for the trap cards, the main bulk of the deck. Starting off, we're going to go with the Altergeist first. So 3 copies of Altergeist Protocol. This is one of the main trap cards in the deck because you can protect your Altergeist effects and activations, so they cannot be negated by your opponent's card effects. So if your opponent uses Solemn Strike and things like that, it just doesn't work on your Altergeists. And also, Protocol is also fantastic because you can negate the effects of your opponent's monsters just by sending 1 Altergeist card from your side of the field to the graveyard, and you can just negate the activation and destroy it. So Protocol is a fantastic card that your opponent definitely has to watch out for. Now we're also playing 2 copies of Altergeist Manifestation. I cut this down from 3 to 2 because you don't really need to see it as often anymore because you're really just relying on your multi-faker for a lot of your plays in swarming the field. Now Manifestation got a buff in the recent TCG card text update, which it's going to get reprinted, I believe, in the upcoming set, Battles of Legend, Relentless Revenge, and it's being buffed to what the OCG has. It's getting its proper effect. So basically, if you activate this card and you use Silkwoodus and you bounce this back to your hand, you can still get the revival with this card, and then you can just set this card, you know, during your next turn or whatever. So it's a nice little loop and interaction that you can do with Silkwoodus. And it's finally going to be, you're finally going to be able to use it in the TCG now, so that's definitely something to watch out for. It's definitely a really, really good buff to Altergeist. So yeah, 2 copies of Manifestation is all you really need. 3 is kind of bricky, you don't really want to see it in your opening hand, but you know, on subsequent turns, it's definitely fantastic. Now we have this honorary Altergeist trap card, Personal Spoofing. Doesn't have Altergeist in the name, so unfortunately Marionetta cannot set this from your deck to your side of the field, but we're playing 3 copies of this because it is so powerful. And the reason why is because you can just shuffle any Altergeist card from your hand or face up on your field into the deck, and then you can add 1 Altergeist monster from your deck to your hand, and typically the card that you're going to add to your hand is going to be a copy of your multi-faker. And multi-faker, if you have forgotten, multi-faker, when you activate a trap card, you can special summon this from your hand. So spoofing will go ahead and, you know, shuffle an Altergeist into your deck. You can add your multi-faker to your hand, and then right after the trap card resolves and you added this to your hand, you can special summon it out, and then special something like Silkwoodus from your deck to your side of the field as well. So definitely a very powerful interaction. Basically access 3 extra copies of multi-faker, so if you don't have it in your hand, you can get access to it with this. And this is also really nice because with Konkori, you can go ahead and, after you negate an attack, you summon Konkori to your side of the field. Spoofing can shuffle the Konkori back into your deck. You search another copy of Konkori, the same copy that you shuffled back in, and then you can negate attacks over and over depending on however many spoofings you have on your side of the field. So that's a really powerful interaction that I don't see a lot of people take advantage of, but it can definitely save you in a bind, and it can definitely save you from taking damage while negating your opponent's attacks. So yeah, that's it for the Altergeist trap cards. Next off, we're going to go into some of the others that we play. So next off, this is a card that's, you know, very expensive. We're 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence. Of course, I don't have it. And if you don't have it and you want to play this deck in real life, just replace it with something like Effect Veiler. You can even replace it with other trap cards that you deem to be effective. This is definitely not mandatory, but it is very, very powerful for this deck. It's a trap card, so it can help trigger your multi-faker, and it does the same thing Effect Veiler does while locking down one of your opponent's spell and trap zones for the turn, which is actually kind of nice. So yeah, definitely 3 copies of Impermanence, very, very good. Now, next off, we're also playing 3 copies of Torrential Tribute, and this is one of the cards that I really love in this deck because of its interaction with things like Personal Spoofing. So let's say you have Personal Spoofing on your side of the field, you have an Altergeist, and your opponent summons a monster that you want to get rid of. You can activate your Torrential Tribute, and then Spoofing can go ahead and shuffle your monster on your field back to your deck to search out a copy of Multi-Faker. Torrential Tribute resolves, wiping out the entire field, and now you can summon that multi-faker out from your hand to your side of the field, summon out Silkwoodus or whatever out as well. So you basically keep your field presence, your monsters don't get destroyed because spoofing saves it, and then you wipe your opponent's field as well. It's really, really nice, and it's really reminiscent of like Ritual Beast interactions with Torrential Tribute, and that's really why I love this card in this deck. So yeah, 3 copies of that to top it off. Now, next off, we're playing some of the floodgates in this deck. We're playing 2 copies of Anti-Spell Fragrance. This is a sexy version, it's secret rare, it's really nice. And we're also playing 1 copy of Imperial Order. Now, this is, of course, because Sky Strikers are running rampant, and you want to have a counter to those decks where they generate a ton of advantage really, really quickly. So Anti-Spell Fragrance and Imperial Order, the reason why Melusine is actually really nice, because when you attack your opponent directly, you can send a card on their side of the field to the graveyard. So typically, if they're playing something like Sky Strikers and they're playing a bunch of spells, they're going to set them so they can activate them on their next turn. Melusine can help get rid of those cards from their side of the field, and Silkwoodus can bounce those cards that are set from the field back to the opponent's hand, so they have to set them again next turn. You just basically lock them out of activating spell cards ever. So that's why Anti-Spell Fragrance is actually really, really powerful in this deck. Very reminiscent of how Tellarknights abused Trigger and the anti-spell and basically made it so you can never play any spell cards. So that's why I really love this interaction. Alright, so we're playing 2 copies of Solemn Strike right here, and then we're playing 1 copy of Solemn Judgment, of course, because God says no, and God provides divine punishment. And that's basically it. You negate monster effects, you negate anything that's really, really potent, spell and trap cards that can wipe your field, you'll evenly mash, things like that, red reboots. You can, of course, side deck your own copies of red reboot to counteract, evenly mashed and your opponent's red reboots, so that's definitely something to keep in mind, but I definitely wouldn't main deck them because against decks like Sky Strikers, they're basically useless. So yeah, anyway, that does it for the main deck. Next off, we're going to go into the extra deck. Alright guys, so for the extra deck, starting off, we're going to be working with some of the Altergeist monsters first. So we're starting off with 2 copies of Altergeist Hexia. Now Hexia is one of those Altergeist cards that also got a change in the TCG, so it's aligned with the OCG again. Now originally in the TCG, Hexia can only negate spell and trap cards, not effects, but now after the rewording of the card, it can negate spell and trap card effects as well. So if your opponent has like a face-up field spell, face-up continuous spell trap card, you can also negate and destroy those cards as well. So Hexia is definitely much, much better now than it was before. So you're running 2 copies, of course, because Hexia is one of those cards that you're probably going to be summoning most of the time in your duels, if anything, from your extra deck. So you'll summon a Hexia into your extra monster zone and a Hexia under it, so that you can basically stack up your spell and trap effect negations, because the Hexia at the bottom can negate by attributing one of the Altergeists she's pointing to, and then the other Hexia contribute the Hexia that's under it to negate another spell and trap card. So you basically get like 2 negations from the setup, which is really, really strong, because you're coupled with all of your other floodgates and all of your other negations, you're going to be sitting at a really good position. Now, I'm also playing 1 copy of Altergeist Kidolga, and Kidolga is one of my favorite monsters in the extra deck, in this deck, because of the fact that you can just easily steal stuff from your opponent's graveyard, and yeah, you basically use it against them. It's a really good, nice little form of monster reborn that you can use, and the monster you bring back you can use for link summons and things like that as well, so that's also why it's kind of cheeky, and I like it. And last but not least, we're playing 1 copy of Altergeist Prime Banshee. Now, this is a card that you're not really summoning too often. If you do summon it, okay, it's not really too useful, but it's just there if you need it. It has a kind of neat effect where you can tutor out Altergeist from your deck, which is kind of nice. You can trigger things like Multi-Faker and stuff like that as well. But yeah, Prime Banshee is one of those things that you can easily substitute out for like maybe Ghost Reaper targets, depending on how you side deck. I didn't include Reaper targets in my extra deck because of the fact that it just really depends on what your meta is in your local area or your regional area, so you can definitely tweak this to your own desire. Now we're playing 1 copy of Link Kuriboh. This is a pretty staple card in the extra deck because of the fact that Meluseek is a level 1, so you can easily just Meluseek into Link Kuriboh, and Meluseek can get a search because she was sent from the field to the graveyard. You can get your other Altergeist into your hand to set up for your opponent's turn. I'm also playing 1 copy of Underclock Taker. This deck doesn't really care too much about things like Ibli and whatnot, but it's just nice to have access to Underclock Taker because your monsters are pretty weak in the main deck, and being able to lower the attack of your opponent's monsters so you can run over them is actually kind of nice utility overall. And of course, the extra deck is very flexible, so you actually have space to run these things. So we have 1 copy of Proxy Dragon and 1 copy of Akashic Magician. Proxy Dragon's here just for utility. You can replace it with something else if you'd like. Akashic Magician is actually kind of nice to have because of the fact that you can bounce some of your opponent's monsters back to their hand or to their extra deck. If your opponent's playing one of those extra link monsters and things like that, hopefully if they have an arrow pointing from their extra monster zone to like your main monster zone, you can summon Akashic Magician, bounce back whatever's in the extra monster zone, and then you can get an extra monster zone to work with. We don't really care too much about being extra linked and things like that, but Akashic Magician is just a little bit of utility, and it's non-destruction, non-targeting removal, so it's kind of nice. But yeah, anyway, that does it for these cards right here. Next off, we have some of the Nightmare cards, of course. So for the Nightmares, we're playing 1 copy of Nightmare Cerberus, 1 copy of Nightmare Phoenix, and 1 copy of Nightmare Goblin. Now these cards are all really just toolboxing utility for the deck. Cerberus pops special summon monsters in the main monster zone, Phoenix pops spells and trap cards, and Goblin gives you an additional normal summon. These don't really come up too often, but if you do need to tap to your extra deck and you want some utility, some spot removal, these are the cards to go for. Goblin can also give you an extra normal summon, which is kind of nice because you can normal summon marionettes from your hand if you need to. So that's definitely an option that you can go for, and set some extra spells, or set some extra Altergeist traps from your deck to your side of the field. Okay, now for the last two Link monsters that I played, they're the higher Link monsters. So we have one copy of Decode Talker, and we have one copy of Borlo Dragon. Borlo Dragon's really just here for utility. Decode Talker is here to like help protect your stuff from targeting effects, because your opponent's probably going to be targeting your spell and trap cards to remove them from your side of the field. So having that extra protection's kind of nice. The Borlo Dragon's here just in case you need the utility to get over your opponent's monsters that you can't normally attack over, so there's that. And then the last two cards in my extra deck that I play are going to be one copy of Utopia and one copy of Utopia the Lightning. I just had the space for this, so I decided to put them in. The deck doesn't really tap into the extra deck that much. You can cut a lot of this stuff and just replace it with a bunch of Ghost Reaper targets if you really wanted to. The ones that you summon the most are going to be things like Altergeist Hexia and possibly like Akashic Magician or some of the Nightmares. But everything else is really optional and is definitely up to you. So yeah. That does it for the extra deck, and that does it for the deck profile. So thank you all so much for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed it or found it helpful, please leave a like, subscribe for more Altergeist content, and leave a comment down below letting me know what I can do to improve. And until next time, take care.